No more podcast P for the Philadelphia 76ers, but a loss is a loss. They fall to the Knicks 110-105. Let's break it down right here on Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On 76ers. We're your host, Keith Pompey, 76ers beat writer. I'm Kayla Santiago, sideline reporter and play-by-play broadcaster for the Delaware Blue Coats, the Philadelphia 76ers NBA G League affiliate. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe here to Locked On 76ers. In addition, wherever you listen to your podcasts on audio platforms, and you can look at our free daily newsletter on lockedondaily.com. So the 76ers, they fall to the Knicks 110-105. The Knicks coming into this on back-to-back losses. They're without Karl-Anthony Towns in this game. The 76ers gave it a fight there in the end, but in the end, it was the Knicks that were able to come out on top. Some last possessions there, Keith, for the Philadelphia 76ers not going their way. They showed some fight in this game, more than we've seen in a while, but still their 9th straight loss. And we're dating back to some rough times in terms of how many losses they've had in a row.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to look at this as a moral victory and stuff like that. And you know what? I'm not really big on moral victories. I'm not. At the end of the day, a loss is a loss, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at it, they lost 9 straight. This is their longest losing streak since losing 12 consecutive games during the 2015-16 season. That's when the Sixers went 10 and 72. So when you look at it, yes, it was a close win, right? A close loss. But at the same time, I'm not big on the moral victories. And here's the thing. It was a pretty good game. The 76ers came back. They made a nice run. And then you talk about the last couple possessions. It was, one of those things where they went up. Tyrese Maxey hit a 3, he hit a layup actually to make them go up, because what happened is Kelly Oubre hit a 3. Then all of a sudden it was one of those things where, Tyrese Maxey hits a driving floater to give them a 102-98 lead with 2 minutes and 42 seconds remaining. Then after that, Maxey comes down and he misses a 3-pointer. Now, it was a nice shot, but it came in and went out. Then he comes back down and then he misses a layup. But while he's missing, Brunson comes back. He gets a layup. He comes back. He hits a 3. The next thing you know, the Knicks are up 105-102. Then Maxey comes back down. He misses a layup. Drummond misses the putback. Maxey misses another layup, right? And game over. It was basically game over at that particular point. And to me, yes, a lot of people were going to talk about Podcast P, saying I'm no longer going to be on the podcast anymore. He did have a great game. I give him all the credit, right? But it just seems like when they needed him the most, Paul George didn't touch the ball in the final 3 minutes and 28 seconds. He ended up with 25 points. He had 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, but 7 turnovers. Tyrese Maxey had 30 points, right? He on 12 for 32 shooting. But it just seemed like Kelly Oubre had 27 points. But it just seemed like they had the game in hand. And down the stretch, there was lack of ball movement. And that will cost them the game. And I get it. A lot of people are talking about what a great effort against the New York Knicks, yada, yada, all that. But to me, this was a blown opportunity, and they choked.
A huge blown opportunity because you don't expect them going in to win this game. But if you're watching this team right now, you say, okay, if you have games that are winnable, you need to go out there and put your best effort in the end. And when you talk about Paul George's turnover margin there, 7 turnovers, the team had 13 total turnovers. That's a lot for Paul George to have 7 of the 13 team total turnovers. That's way too much. And yes, once again, he talked about not being on the podcast. He wants to focus on the team and everything. And everybody gets excited about no podcast, Paul George. Maybe that'll work out for him. It's only one game, so people can't get excited. And it was a loss in general anyway. But when you look at Paul George, 7 turnovers of the team 13, that's just way too many. In addition to, I understand where Tyrese Maxey was trying to push the pace and continue to get some shots up and, but the ball just didn't go anywhere else. Maybe a little bit going back to that hero ball, a little bit too much if you're Tyrese Maxey down the stretch. But this is a game they could have won for a Knicks team that, yes, the Knicks are better than the Philadelphia 76ers, but they're also coming off 2 straight losses. And they also had 2 really tough games before that against the Hawks and the Bulls that they went down to the wire in overtime against before they played the 76ers without Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, once again, the 76ers are the worst team for sure, but this was a game down the stretch where you look at the rest of the game schedule, and we were talking about the other day, you have 25 games left. Which ones can you win? You need to win the ones, Keith, that you have in the palm of your hand. And last night they fall short of the comeback, but down the stretch, they could have. Sharing the ball a little bit more might have worked. The guys didn't touch the ball enough. Paul George not stepping up when he needs to. And it was just a really, really blown opportunity for Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, now I'm going to say this, though. Paul George did have 7 turnovers, but they would not have gotten back into the game if it wasn't for Paul George.
That is true.
I mean, the guy had 10 points in the third quarter on 4 for 5 shooting. He was 2 for 3 on threes, right? And then in the final quarter, he was balling too. But then it just seemed like when the game was on the line, he just wasn't called upon. I mean, he shot 3 for 6. He shot 50%, in the fourth quarter. The only person who shot a better percentage than him was Justin Edwards, who was 2 for 3, right, in that quarter. So, you look at it, and Kelly Oubre was 2 for 2. It just looked like to me that, and it just looked like to me that the hero ball got in the way a little bit. And again, I'm not condemning a Maxey or anything like that, but there was a couple possessions where he was just looking to score, and you have PG hot, you have Kelly hot, and I just felt like, he some of those plays would have been better suited, maybe penetrating, kicking it back out, trying to find people, because I just felt like, if you miss those shots, you're bailing out the Knicks who were on their heels.
And if you're Tyrese Maxey too, the pressure defensively that's going to come to you when you're trying to be the hero late in the game. There's other guys that are out there, especially in Paul George, who helped them really get to that point late in the game as well, who didn't just really see the action. And once again, no knock on Tyrese Maxey, because you can kind of understand where he's coming from. Tyrese just wants to win that game. They haven't been able to win. They're coming up on 9 straight losses, which did end up happening. But that was the downfall to some of Tyrese Maxey's late game play earlier in the season, middle of the season. We've seen it already this year. And once again, it's kind of just like he has this clear aisle and doesn't want to see anywhere in his peripheral or around him to try to give the ball up and have other guys help him out a little bit. I think maybe at this point in Maxey's career, that could be one of, I don't even want to say downfalls, because that's probably not the right word to use it.
It's a downfall.
Yeah,
I
don't want to be too harsh.
You got to be. No, you ain't being harsh.
But
You're being real. I mean, you're being real. The game was on the line, and what happens is, you guys are up, and you're up, and like basically when he missed that 3, and it came out, and then Jalen Brunson came back and put pressure on him. He's like, okay, and then he comes down, he misses a layup, and then Jalen Brunson comes down and hits the 3. I mean, there was a point where it was they were going back and forth, the two of them. Yeah. Brunson ended up on a 9-0 run, a personal 9-0 run, whereas Maxey couldn't get a basket. So, you know what I mean? So, it wasn't one of those things where, I mean, it is what it is. It just happened. It just, if they had it look back again, it's one of those things where, okay, the feel of the game, like who's hot, who's not, who has to get the ball. And when you look at it, and, Brunson, you look at it, that's his job at the end of the game to do things like that. I mean, let's face it, Karl Anthony Towns didn't play, other guys, so it's one of those things. But whereas in the game where you got Paul George, who's balling, Kelly Oubre, who was clutch, it just seemed like to me like the ball should have just moved. It should have moved in the final stretch, and that's the reason why they lost.
And that's something that they struggled with all season long, trying to figure that out in the hands of Tyrese Maxey. Brunson puts them up for go with 128. If you're Maxey, you also need to go what you're going up against. You need to know that too, because a 9-0 run at the end of the game personally is crazy. But you're talking about Jalen Brunson, who's a very good guard, has given you issues in the past, and that's something you have to be aware of. If it's not going for you on the first or second attempt, maybe it's time to start sharing the ball and try to get involved, because the end goal isn't to be the lone one that brings your team back. The end goal is to win the basketball game that could have been in your hands. It could have been possible to win, but now they lose 9 straight games. Once again, 110-105. We're going to keep bringing this game down a little bit right here on Locked On 76ers in just a moment. But right now we have to tell you about some of our great sponsors on the other side. And our great sponsors make this show possible here on Locked On 76ers. First up, it's FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, want to bet a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking to get a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you and your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Once again, go make sure you check out FanDuel today. All right, so Paul George kind of comes out, and we're going to talk about this game, the whole thing in between, but he comes out and talks about how he's no longer going to do the podcast. He's focusing on this run that the 76ers are trying to win some games, and he has really one of his best games in a long time that we can think of. Once again, that 25 points for Paul George. Keith, it's definitely, I think, a coincidence that he mentioned that. And, he had the performance that he did last night, especially helping bring the 76ers back in that contest. You alluded to it earlier, 4 for 9 from three-point line, 3 for 4 from the charity stripe, 9 for 20 on the field as well, 7 assists, 8 rebounds. But to you, what really worked for Paul George in this game? Because we haven't seen him get going or be able to bring a team back like that in quite some time with the 76ers.
Paul George was a little more aggressive. Like early, he just attacked. He was locked in. He attacked in the third quarter. He did a little bit in the second quarter, but he just really start attacking. He looked more like Paul George that played before Joel Embiid came back. And that's granted, the point total that he had. This was the first time that he scored more than 20 points since January the 24th against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And on that night, he scored 30. He had 30 points that night on 11 for 21 shooting. He made 6 of 11 threes that night. But since then, he had like totals of 9, 14, 12, 14, 2, 17, 15, 19. So I felt the attack. Now, here's the one thing I will say about it. There are a lot of people who are critical of Paul George, like saying, oh, well, the season's just about over. So now you decide to lock in and don't do a podcast and this and that. I take it the opposite way because, right about now, Paul George could easily come out and say, you know what, y'all, this season is over with. I've been struggling. I'm basically going to shut it all down. But the fact that he said, you know what, he realized it's never too late to correct a wrong, right? And so now he realizes that, hey, maybe I need to be a little bit more focused. And he comes out and he has a big game. So to me, now again, I'm not into moral victories. I keep telling you that over and over again and things like that. But at the same time, for him to do that and have the wherewithal to say that, when he's struggling, when he's banged up, like, I commend him for that, because he could have easily said, you know what? We don't know if Joel's going to continue playing. I'm a little bit older. I got injuries too. Let me just shut this thing down, because it doesn't seem like we're going to go anywhere.
And one thing I like about Paul George, too, is I feel like he gives us the most realism out of everybody, because we've talked about it before. After a loss, the team, they're going to answer the questions that they need to answer, but they're not going to try to talk too negative. And Paul George, a few days ago comes out and says, we're not playing like a team that can compete for a playoff spot. I'm paraphrasing there. And I feel like it's the most real sentence we've heard from any 76er, including the coaching staff so far this season. So he does have a big game last night. And, the 76ers, I don't think that they're going to go on and win games and get into the play-in. But I will say that if you want to be a team that wrangles fans in a little bit more and keeps them there, if you play games competitively like this, that's where the moral victory can be checked off for the fans. Now, when you're looking at from an analytical point of view, these are the games that you can win if you want to keep on pushing to get into that spot. Because last night, once again, it was the best effort we've seen in a long time, but effort doesn't win you basketball games all the time. You got to close out. You got to share the ball. You got to do what you need to do. And Tyrese Maxey, he's done a lot for the 76ers team this season. He's got to stop with the hero ball. We've talked about this before, and this is something that I think that in these next games, he needs to get better at, because that will make him a better overall player too. So that's something that I look at for the 76ers coming out of this game. In addition to, I want to touch on some other players in this contest. You alluded to Kelly Oubre, and he's somebody that I've been really high on with the 76ers since they got him a bit ago at this point. 27 points, 5 rebounds. Keith, I think the biggest thing for Kelly Oubre, 4 for 6 from three-point land, 9 for 14. What I really liked in his role playing off the ball, he was really able to do that well a night ago, and it really complemented the game of Tyrese Maxey and Paul George too.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it did. Like, Kelly Oubre had, he had 19 points in the first half. He played well. I felt like, the crazy part, in order for the 76ers to win the game, you feel as if that Paul George had to play great, Tyrese Maxey had to play great. But if it wasn't for the performance of Kelly Oubre, the 76ers wouldn't have been in the game, right? They just would not have. He kept them there. The one thing, though, I hate to say this, but I felt like even though these other two guys came back, Tyrese Maxey shot 12 for 32, right? Yeah. I felt like that Kelly Oubre, he was hot. And I felt like, they went away from him a little bit, right? And then you look at it, it's one of those things where, but you're not saying too much because, Paul George is playing well. Prime example, I'm just going to say this third quarter, right? Tyrese Maxey has 12 points on 4 for 8 shooting. Now, again, you got to get him hot.
Yeah.
Paul George has 10 points on 4 for 5 shooting. Kelly Oubre only gets 2 shots. He misses both of them, but he has 2 steals, right? So, but we're talking about a guy in the first half who had 19 points on 7 for 10 shooting. And then you go up and you talk about the fourth quarter. Kelly Oubre, in the fourth quarter, he's 2 for 2, right? So to me, you're saying to yourself, you're like, okay, you went away from this guy. He was the most impactful guy. You look at it, here's a guy who went 7 for 10 in the first half, but he goes 2 for 4 in the second half, right? And he made big shots in the fourth quarter. So he played well, but then again, you got to have the feel. You got to realize who the hot guy is, and you got to keep that person involved, because they were having a tough time. Like, put it this way, he was playing so well that they took Mikal Bridges off of Tyrese Maxey and put him on Kelly Oubre. That's how well he was playing.
Yeah, and when you look at it, I don't understand. The Sixers go away from it so much, and Tyrese Maxey does. And, he, once again, has this straight line view of he needs to win the game, and he needs to do this, and he needs to put the team on his back. Just too much, just way too much. When you have guys that are hot, that's how you win basketball games at any level. You know who the hot hand is. And I'm not saying that those guys needed to take the game-winning shot in that situation, but when you miss 2 to 3 to 4 buckets down the stretch and, Jalen Brunson's going on that 9-0 run, maybe you got to switch it up just a little bit there to be able to have your team to come back and win a very winnable game is what it looked like late in that fourth quarter there. But the 76ers, once again, unable to 110 to 105. There's still more to break down against the New York Knicks. The Villanova Knicks, sometimes people would say as well, relating it to that Philly PA connection a little bit with Brunson, Bridges, and Josh Hart, who had 17 rebounds in the game. We'll touch on more of this matchup when we come back on the other side. And before we get to that, we have to tell you about Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contribution. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash and non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is tiered with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on an annual IRA contribution, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rates subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 per month for 1 year from your first match. Must keep funds in your IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account. Interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC, so make sure you go check that out today. 76ers fall their 9th straight loss. Comparing it to, it's almost as bad as that 2015-16 season where they lost 12 straight games. The 76ers, they could realistically be on their way to that when you look at it. But Keith, I want to ask you about the other side of the coin here. And for the New York Knicks, this is the team that struggled against the Celtics. This is the team that struggled against the Cavaliers. They kept it close against the Bulls and the Hawks. This team seemed a little bit better to me on the other side than last year when you're looking at some Eastern Conference play. They keep it close with the 76ers. Now, granted, they don't have Karl-Anthony Towns and some other pieces on their team because the Knicks were just as close to losing this game as the Sixers were to winning this game. Now, granted, Jalen Brunson was able to go on that 9-0 run, but should anybody be worried about the Knicks, or was this just a loss or a win, you should say? That was close because you don't have Jalen Brunson able to pull it out at the end. The Knicks have been close in a lot of their games as of late.
I'm not impressed with the Knicks anymore. I mean, I was early on, but I'm not now, because when you look at it, I mean, we can go back. Like, I think their last quality win was when they beat Houston on February the 4th, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they beat Houston on February the 4th, and then their next game, February the 8th, they lose to the Boston Celtics 131 to 104. They beat the Indiana Pacers 128 to 115. But we all know how the Pacers are, right? You know what I mean? They can be hot and cold. They beat Atlanta, and they beat Atlanta in overtime by a point. Yep. And then they beat the Chicago Bulls in overtime by 2 points. They get boat raced by Cleveland. They get annihilated by the Boston Celtics. And then they beat the Sixers. So this was one of those games where you look at it where it was kind of like this was more about them trying to have a positive taste in their mouth after like having struggling against teams that they should blow out and getting boat raced against elite teams. And then what happens? they win by 5. They blow a major lead, a big lead, and they win by 5. So to me, I look at it, and there are going to be some people like, yeah, that's what I'm saying, moral victory. Some people are going to be excited, and the Sixers are going to try to use this as like a rallying cry, so fans will feel good. But at the same time, I'm looking at it like it should have never been this close, right? And it tells me that the Knicks aren't as good or as dominant as we thought they were a month ago.
I think the one positive note is that you look at it and you say, okay, well, the last 2 games, the 76ers really looked terrible. Like they were just completely throwing everything away. And they give a lot of effort in this game, but they fall short. At the end of the day, what you're going to look at it as is 9 straight losses that you have back to back to back to back to back, right? That's the reality of the situation here. If you're the Sixers, you're right. They maybe take this momentum and push it throughout the rest of their schedule with the remaining games they have left. But for people that might not watch the Knicks, if you watch the 76ers, they're not necessarily the same team they were last year. Now, that doesn't mean they can't get hot once the playoffs come around and they can't go on a little bit of a run, because they definitely have some of the players to be able to do that. But this team was almost better without Karl-Anthony Towns. They had more depth, and now they bring Cat in, and they're against some opponents that they shouldn't be close against. Cat playing in those games too, and one of those games that was in overtime as well. So yes, they still have Jalen Brunson, they still have Josh Hart, they have Mikal Bridges, and everything in between. But this is the Knicks team that the 76ers, if they were able to pull it out, could have also just beaten them, because they have been a little bit very inconsistent as of late. If you look back in their schedule, losing those last 2 games and then going in overtime to those opponents like the Bulls as well, that the 76ers just got demolished by. So once again, moral victory is really, really tough to come by. Maybe there is some, consistency with maybe Paul George shouldn't go on podcast anymore. I don't know. It's only been 1 game, so I don't think people can get too excited about that. But I want to go to the reality factor here, Keith. It's 9 straight losses for the Philadelphia 76ers. They're in really bad territory in a game where they really could have broken that late down the stretch. And this going beyond this game really puts them in rough territory. It could be worse than that 2015-16 season if they drop 3 more games.
Yeah, it could. I mean, you're talking
not
about
overall. Not overall.
You're talking about the losing streak.
Yeah.
I mean, then we're talking about. But here's the thing: that wasn't their longest losing streak of that season. Yeah, that team, they opened up the year like losing like 17 straight. Yeah. Then they lost like 12. I mean, it was ridiculous. But yeah, it could be. I mean, it could, because they got upcoming tough opponents playing next. Where they play Golden State on Saturday. Here's the thing, like. The one thing is, and so here's the crazy part, like, to me, this is just tells you how much the season has changed. Because in the beginning of the season, we were looking at it as if the Sixers they had the 3rd best odds to win a championship of anyone, right?
Crazy, yeah.
They go and play a Knicks team who basically got boat raced by 2 teams back-to-back games. And the Sixers fell apart in the final 3 minutes. Fell apart. Like, losing teams find ways to lose, they say. And we're looking at it like, well, dang, they kept it close. So since they kept it close, this is something to build upon. To me, it just tells you the status of, like, how far things have changed. And you can't go and say, well, they didn't have Joel, or they didn't have Aaron Gordon. Well, this team didn't have Cat. They had a dude, their starting center for that team. He tied his season high on the opening possession when he got a lob, a dunk. And then he leaves the game because he gets hurt, right? Yeah. So, to me, it's kind of like, and I'm not trying to be harsh or anything like that, but I just see what I saw, and I saw how they imploded down the stretch. And this was a team, because like in the past, let's keep it real now. The 76ers in the past, they were always that team whenever you assumed that they were going to lose and get blown out, they would escape with a victory.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, they can't do that because they stand in their own way. And that's what happened tonight. They just stood in their way. They had a chance, but they just stood in their way. It was because of the lack of ball movement.
And I think if you're Tyrese Maxey, he's had a good season and he's had to step up in a lot of different ways. Your reality is that you might not make the plan. You might possibly make the plan because, once again, they're not so far-fetched from that 10 seed right now. I think if you're Tyrese Maxey, if you want to get better in these 20-plus games, you got to stop playing hero ball Maxey late down the stretch. You can be a clutch player, but you can't go up for 4 possessions and miss them and not share the ball. That can make Tyrese Maxey a better player, and we've been talking about it all season long. That's something that has to open up, and it can open up. You have other guys, especially if you have a guy like Paul George and Kelly Oubre that have been having really, really good games. They need the ball a little bit more late down the stretch. It's not just only Tyrese Maxey, and he's got to open that up. I would like to see that in the next lump sum of games coming up, if the 76ers can keep them close and competitive like they were able to last night. But they do fall to the New York Knicks 110-105. 9 straight losses for the Philadelphia 76ers. And Paul George, no more podcasts for you. Let's see if you can keep it on going and keep scoring and playing at the high ability you were able to a night ago. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On 76ers with Keith Pompey. I'm Kayla Santiago saying so long, and we'll see you guys next time.